InsightAI, powered by InsightJam.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Paula, and welcome to InsightAI, powered by InsightJam, a podcast where experts from the enterprise technology community dive into the evolving world of artificial intelligence. Each episode will explore real-world applications and challenges for AI to help demystify what this technology is. Whether you're a tech enthusiast or just curious about artificial intelligence, we'll make sure you walk away with a clearer understanding of these complex issues. And to help us with that in this episode are Ana Santosh, founder and CEO of Craft AI, and Doug Shannon, Global Intelligent Automation and Gen AI leader. Ana, Doug, thanks for being here.
Thanks, John. Really happy and excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm happy to be here, and hopefully we should have a great conversation.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. With that said, I'm going to step out of the way and let you two lead this discussion, and then I'll be back at the end of the show to help wrap things up.
Thanks for that introduction, John. I'm happy and excited to be here and be joined by Doug today. My name is Ana Santosh. I'm the founder and CEO of Craft AI. And in my previous life, I spent almost a decade in deep learning and AI research, as well as corporate consulting, product management, and the like. So today, I'm happy to be here hosting this podcast with Doug.
Yeah, and so quickly, Doug Shannon, that's the best way to understand what I do is, my lifetime of doing IT and automation and jumping into Gen AI. The best way to understand where I'm coming from is I'm not an AI researcher like you hear from everybody online. I'm a practitioner that's actually doing this in the day-to-day, and I'm in the trenches with everybody else trying to learn this and driving the changes that I see that are impactful.
So today we are exploring the implementation of GPT-4 at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, highlighting the challenges and lessons learned. But before we get started, I wanted to clear up a common misconception about generative AI. Doug, you might enjoy this. So despite its name, generative AI is more predictive in nature. The actual process by which the models like GPT-4 or Llama generate continuous text is a little bit nuanced. So what the model does is it predicts the next part of the prompt based on patterns it has learned from a large data set. Here's how it works. When you give a prompt to a generative AI model, it takes in the prompt and uses its learned understanding to predict one of the most likely next word or token. And it does this by analyzing the probabilities of various possible continuations. So for example, let's take the prompt, my name is Ana, I'm a blank. The model would look for possible next words. This step is informed based on the internal understanding the model has developed during the training stage using the information from the training data. So in this case, the most probable word could be woman based on the model's understanding. But models like ChatGPT don't just predict the most probable word. That would be very deterministic. Instead, it randomly chooses one from either the top, say, 5 most likely words or one of the top 5% likely words. So that introduces some variability in the output. So the next possible words could be after woman, could be girl, mother, lawyer, pilot, I don't know. So from these words, it would randomly choose any as the output. And if you want to generate, say, a longer text from a prediction model like this, you append that output to the original text and then run the whole process again to make a new prediction based on all the new text, including what it just added. And that's how it generates a continuous conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does that. So that's a good rundown to actually explain it out to people of how generative AI works. The future side of that and where we're at now in this area of utilizing that is that's when you get into like grounding of that same data. So instead of just like looking for the next word, you can actually say, use this text as grounding, use this text as my own words that I want to use. So instead of like money, I want to use buck or bucks or monies or something like that. And it'll actually utilize that to ground its information, which helps with the hallucination part of it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Do you have like a list of no use words? I have mine. Like I specifically say, do not use dive, do not use realm, do not use evolution.
No landscape.
Yeah. And I think like understanding this can help us appreciate also why ChatGPT or Claude doesn't give the same response every single time for the same prompt.
Yeah. I mean, different LLMs also are built with different knowledge bases or different foundational knowledge. And so you'll find like Minstrel, right? Like that'll give you more like a scientific or even some medical terms that GPT will not. So
Right. Definitely. But what I've noticed sometimes is for the same prompt, sometimes the response that ChatGPT gives and the response that Claude gives could be like exactly identical. But I wondered around the same lines. If they use like possibly different knowledge bases, how is it approximately the same? I think like there are like indications of that, but like word by word, sometimes I find matches.
yeah, it gets strange when you get into how the foundational models are made because you have instruct models, you have other ways that they're made to look, and especially with the GPT 4.0, the Omni model, they're actually talking about bringing in chain of thought, and so it's actually going to break down whatever prompt you're putting in to
Yeah.
actually dive into more of like, well, where was that said, and where was it in the context of how they said it.
Definitely. I think like that's something that probably we can cover in detail in one of the future episodes. The alignment part that comes after a foundational model is in place. So with that, let's move into the case study part. So I want to premise this by talking about why we chose this case study in particular. So making generative AI tools available enterprise-wide for general use could be a great first step for businesses in their AI adoption journey. Moreover, because of how accessible these tools like ChatGPT or Claude are, many professionals use it on a day to day basis, especially knowledge workers with very little oversight. And many businesses banned the use of these tools at the workplace. And the main concern there was data privacy and security. And very valid, as there was this news from Samsung, I think it was April of 2023, where the engineers accidentally leaked company secrets to ChatGPT not once but 3 times. So this was again beginning of last year when conversations around privacy policy, especially that of OpenAI, hadn't matured yet. So this is why this particular case study is relevant because of deployment of Gen AI in any business comes with certain unique risks and ethical challenges pertinent to the domain in which they operate.
Yeah, I mean, quickly just to add there. So the reason why a lot of companies blocked it is on the point of what you're saying, but it's also just the fact that, just like the Samsung example, I may have my own biases on my own data. So I may enter something in and I'm saying, oh, I think this is okay because I don't see this as, proprietary data, for example. Maybe I use it every day and I don't see this proprietary within the role or the position that I have in the company. Yet those same people, that's why they're leaking stuff. And this is why I usually make a joke of where, Coca-Cola has their secret sauce for what they've done for many years. And eventually it's going to be escaped from the confines of their company because of somebody's going to put in a ChatGPT model or some kind of LLM, and it's going to get out there and be recorded somewhere. So when you do a search, what's the ingredients to make Coca-Cola? You're going to find it right there just because of the same thing that we're talking about.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this news. It was somebody posted it today. There was this recipe, or like I think it was a Google search for a cake recipe, and the AI overview suggested adding glue to thicken it. And it was because there was a Reddit post where somebody sarcastically said, mix glue into the cake recipe, and that surfaced as the AI overview.
Or maybe it was from the show, Is It Cake? And they're trying to hide whether or not it is cake or not.
But these are very valid concerns, especially around accuracy, bias, transparency, and especially these days, the need for human oversight and how it impacts your business is very specific, again, to the industry and domain you are in. So whether your organization is already exploring generative AI or still weighing the pros and cons, I think Dana-Farber's experience could be a starting point in understanding some of the complexities regarding deployment and hopefully provide some guidelines on how this can be achieved with a little bit more strategy in place. So let's get into the details. The goal of this project by Dana-Farber Cancer Institute was to make GPT-4 available institute-wide for their workforce of over 12,500 employees. So we'll explore the challenges they faced, the solutions they implemented, and the lessons they learned along the way. First, let's break down the key aspects of the project. So the first major step was securing executive sponsorship. And given the novelty and potential risks associated with deploying generative AI, especially to 12,500 plus people, again, as Doug mentioned, don't know where exactly their roles and responsibilities fit, especially as it pertains to internal data, it was important to have like a strong backing from the top. And Dana-Farber's leadership, which included the Chief Information Officer, the General Counsel, and the Chief Data and Analytics Officer, so they championed this project. And the very first question they had was whether it was possible to configure the proprietary LLM like GPT-3 or 4 such that all input and output would be private. And this was a deal breaker for them in particular. The input-output should not be available to any third parties, including Microsoft or OpenAI or any other customers of OpenAI, and nor be used by the model to train or improve.
There's a quick add there, right? So with Microsoft and Azure, and they're one of the biggest players right now and platforms that's actually providing this for a lot of enterprises. And when you look at the methods or the instructional methods that they provide, Microsoft is always watching the subscription or the resource group or what's actually being put in to a prompt, for example. They're not taking it and keeping it, but they do monitor to ensure that you're not breaking rules even within your own company.
Yeah.
But again, they say that they're not keeping the information, but they are monitoring the aspect of that. And so even that would break on this use case that we're talking to. That's one of the things that they probably found out. They're like, wait, we want just our own thing. No matter how you slice it, you're not going to really get your own thing unless you build your own thing. So
especially when it says like secure private, there is like a lot of like small text under there, which companies like Dana-Farber must be like particularly interested in because of how they use or monitor any of these logs. So in this case, this was possible through the Azure OpenAI services, that is to preserve patient privacy and confidentiality and deploy a secure private ChatGPT-like interface while being compliant with the US Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's generally referred to as HIPAA. I think like having regulatory compliance frameworks like this makes it more easier for institutes to like demand more security and privacy from these providers.
It does. I mean, there's even other opportunities there, right? So you have a lot of people talk about APIs, and APIs are great when they're actually valid APIs. But when you have things in like the healthcare space that we're talking about here, there's other even functionalities like FHIR and some of these other ones. So FHR is pronounced like fire. It's from Harvard.
Right.
And they're trying to accumulate all of the healthcare data and really drive a lot of that symbolism there and just like overall like architecture. It's very slow going, but it's something to watch out for.
Definitely. I think, and that's why like the importance of governance comes in. So in this particular case, they established a generative AI governance committee to inform and guide all subsequent steps of the project. And this particular committee had broad representation from all major departments, including research, legal, human resources, clinical operations. So this multidisciplinary nature of the committee, and they were tasked with developing guidelines for responsible LLM use while rigorously evaluating the risks around intellectual property, as you mentioned, data privacy, plagiarism, which is something we can cover later on as well, especially in the context of medical data and publications, the output accuracy, which again informs a lot of the work that research does, and then bias and compliance, again related to the domain. So the two parallel work streams that emerged from this committee, one was focused on the technical requirements and developing a technical model in place for a secure private deployment. and the other was dedicated to drafting a comprehensive policy governing the ethical use of this tool across the organization.
Yeah, I think having stakeholders or like a committee, right, is massively important, because what happens in an enterprise situation like this is versus a small or medium-sized company. Small and medium-sized companies, you have less people, you have less legacy data, you have less systems and platforms that are involved. So it's a lot easier for smaller and medium-sized to utilize Gen AI very quickly. However, in the enterprise, when you have 12,000 employees that we're talking about here and knowledge workers that are involved in this, you have business teams, you have BAs, you have business users that don't even understand the IT side of this, and then you have like your main technical and leadership teams. If you don't have the right committee or stakeholders or some kind of way to have many involved, you're not going to move very fast. So your business team should be enabled to kind of level up a little bit with some of the leadership there, have them in some kind of meeting so that they can actually drive the changes faster, and also take that information that they're gathering from the business, from being business driving teams, to actually inform leadership much more emphatically, or embolden them to actually have the ability to talk to leadership and provide that information back. Because even your C-suites and your leaders that are out there in a lot of these enterprises don't understand the innovation that's coming and don't know what to do. So your business driver teams are going to be your best bet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like sometimes it feels a bit counterintuitive to have all these structures and frameworks in place before you even start like the technical implementation. But I think in the long run, it makes the process much more seamless and guided towards these bigger organizational goals. So the core technical requirements for this tool were straightforward. Provide a simple ChatGPT-like interface, but with privacy, security, logging, and auditability controls. Again, all data interactions had to remain private and secure. And Microsoft Azure was selected as the cloud provider, using only HIPAA-cleared services and components to ensure a compliant, secure environment. And 4 OpenAI deployments were created, the GPT-4 and the GPT 3.5 Turbo via the web interface, and also their 16K and 32K context window variants. And these variants were only accessible with API, and this allowed to handle for higher throughput requirements for power users. And the security measures included a dedicated IP address, corporate VPN routing, service-to-service authentication, user authentication against identity management, and encryption in transit. And more importantly, at the application layer, all models were configured with the strictest content filtering on both input prompts and outputs to block potential unsafe or harmful content. This is a service that's available through Azure OpenAI services, and logging of all activities, regardless of filtering status, was implemented for auditability later on. And additionally, processes were established for requesting retrieval augmented generation modes or RAG modes, allowing users to provide document datasets to constrain or expand the model outputs with source citations. And all of the source code and infrastructure as code is open source. It's available through their GitHub, and I think will definitely benefit others pursuing similar deployments.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at their GitHub. I checked that out early on when we were taking a look at this. The some of the stuff that you talked about though, and the things that they don't always give all the information, right? So a lot of times with enterprises, and then when working through Azure, you have most everybody that's going to work through them is going to be like the pay to play model, right? And so what that means is everybody's on the same pipes. So same networking, same AI pipes. What that means is like dependent on region, you have a certain amount of throughput or tokens or, just like pipe available so that you can actually ask these questions and gain prompts and whatnot. And so what happens is if you have teams of people or other companies out there that are pulling millions of tokens, there's a chance that you may not be able to do the same. And so what a lot of times very large companies are looking at, well, how do I have my own pipe to an actual server, to an actual LLM so that we can actually drive this interaction? And that usually can cost a lot of money per month, like in the tens of thousands per month, depending on which region you have to work with Microsoft on that. So I don't want to quote them.
Yeah, I think for this particular case, the highest model or the highest context window model, the GPT-4, uh, if using their entire input and output length was costing about $2 per request. And that
Or-
was specifically for research purposes, reserved for research purposes, and you have to request access first. So I think they have like guardrails around cost and like also continuous monitoring of it, but like these high throughput cases are reserved via API access.
Right. But then even though we say each request is around $2, it actually varies. And it is something that's very hard still for enterprises or anybody that's actually being charged for using this functionality. It's hard to know what you're going to get. LLMs have a very good way of adding a lot of words and adding a lot of tokens. And so what happens there is you end up seeing, you don't know how much it costs. You find out afterwards. There is no like, hey, I'm going to put this together. I'm going to drive this effort. And then you're like, what's it going to cost? Oh, it's this. No, you don't have that. You have what's it going to cost after, and you have a good range. But we have to also remember for platforms like Microsoft and other ones, they have services that are being ran in the background. So some of these events like search services could be up to $20 a day every day. And so if you're using it or not using it, you're still being charged that. And so there is a range there, and depending on how you're using it. But just remember, there's other charges outside of that if you're going to drive this, you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why they were undertaking the technical implementation on parallel with the policy guidelines. I think like some of these cost related can be integrated into the policy and guidelines they set.
Yep.
So the technical implementation addressed most of the data privacy and security concerns. The questions remained around the ethical use of large language models, especially in a healthcare setting. So the governance committee developed a comprehensive policy explicitly covering 5 key areas. So the first was accuracy and bias. The users were explicitly warned that through the front end of the tool that AI generated content could be incomplete, inaccurate, or biased, which is applicable to any LLMs. And they remain solely responsible. I mean, the users remain solely responsible for verifying any information before using it, as with any other tool or technology. And secondly, what the governance committee considered was the suitability restrictions. So again, this is domain specific, and the tool was deemed inappropriate for clinical decision making. This was, again, as I was reading, a very heated debate, and one conclusion that let everyone come on board with this project. So the tool's output could not be entered into patient medical records until ethical frameworks for such use cases mature.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of that, right, as things go forward. Some of the laws, even some of the EU acts and everything, is still leaning on the side of. Well, luckily, I think it's a good idea of saying, the AI can't do the work that doctors do. It cannot prescribe. It cannot say this is what's happening. You can give, doctors and or nurses and or even nurse practitioners here in the United States, it could give them like ideas like, hey, I think it might be, or here's an opportunity. Like, did you look at this? It could be a way to like QA our own people, just not like QA them on purpose, but QA them just to give them other opportunities or other perspectives that they may have not have realized. Or, hey, you ran this blood test. Did you notice that the cholesterol was too high or something like that? And like they did, right. But sometimes that correlates to something else that is like a rarity that maybe if these LLMs are grounded enough, it could have that leveraged data.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also like not a straightforward task. If you start permitting like certain clinical decisions, like where do you draw the boundary? Where is it acceptable? Where is it not acceptable? I think like the policy and the guidelines around it is maturing. And I think as and when that develops, the governance policy would also develop to incorporate those changes.
It would. And I think overall, just most of the things that are going to be ruled on are going to be saying if it's impacting humans directly and a decision is going to impact a human directly, then a human should be making that decision. It doesn't
Oh,
mean that human shouldn't have AI data to help to assist them to make that decision. It just means that at the buck stops with a human making a decision against and or for another human.
yeah, yeah. Human in the loop. And like,
Yeah, like literally to the point of that. Yeah. So
literally. So another consideration was disclosure requirements. Again, as to the point Doug was just making, any use of this tool must be clearly disclosed, such as in research publications, documents, or presentations incorporating the AI output. And fourth was copyright concerns. So this also relates back to plagiarism in a way. So the models, there's a potential that it could generate text containing copyrighted content because the underlying model is still GPT-4. We are still not very sure or certain about the sources of input data that was used to train it. So users were cautioned about potential plagiarism or IP infringement risks when using the output. And fifth was data minimization. This is again a principle. As a principle, users should provide only the minimum input data required to accomplish their intended task on this particular tool. So those were like the five main themes or ideas around which their policy was developed.
yeah, some interesting stuff on the Microsoft side is that Azure platform is one of the only ones that also has skills. And so inside of it, when you're actually building your LLMs and you're working with whatever model that they have now that they're actually opening up more models, you have the ability to run your process, run your overall interaction, and you can actually run these skills as part of a governance process as well. They have a HIPAA skill. They have a skills that will actually take out some of this proprietary information or PII. And so you can actually build that in. There's again cost to that, but like overall, it's kind of neat to have a way to filter the data as it's actually in motion. And so that's kind of neat. So I think it could help with some of those points that were just made.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think like even though these are like the general use cases, they are like working on specific use cases around patient health information or PHI and PII within like a limited context. I think that would be probably leveraging some of the skills that you mentioned. Okay, so with sponsorship secured, a governance framework in place, the technical platform and policy and guidelines ready, it was time to roll this tool to Dana-Farber's workforce. And the launch model that they followed was a phased approach, starting with a small group of around 30 power users for further testing, bug fixes, and feedback for improvement. And then access was gradually opened up via a ticketing system, first to a large computational research department and a major operations team. And user communications played a key role with email broadcasts and office hours to socialize the new tool, provide access details, reiterate again the appropriate use policies, and share training on effective prompt engineering strategies. And default usage quotas were conservatively set initially. It was increased in line with user adoption growth to match the demand. This is again coming back to the point around cost, which was a primary concern for them. Was part of it was baked into some of the policy and guidelines that they had. And as these changes were happening, the governance committee's role transitioned to an ongoing oversight function, reviewing new case proposals, developing more formal policies as needed, discussing the ethical considerations with community input, and monitoring compliance through audit logs. I think some of their most promising initial use cases are in operational areas like streamlining documentation, querying policies, and drafting business documents. And on the research front, studies are leveraging this tool's ability to handle PHI and PII in secure environments, which we mentioned briefly early on.
Looking at some of the ethical sides of this, right? So when we look at ethics, and we have ethics going on all around us, there's professional ethics on the business side, there's ethics going on all around the world right now that we have to like look at and how do we deal with it. But in the form and context of AI, what we have to understand is that in general, and from what I've looked up in scientific studies, like all humans, all of us carry about 50 different biases that we have at all times. And whether or not they have a strong, behavior or not, ideally you want to be, as long as we're aware of it. And on the professional side, we want to make sure we're aware of the biases that we have in our data. And the interesting fact is that all of our data that is entered in by humans inherently is biased. And so we have to look at that. So when we're looking at prompting these data points, or we're looking at asking certain questions, or we're saying like, hey, be creative in the response, or yes, we're grounding the data so we handle the hallucinations. But even in our prompts, we have to make sure we don't hypnotize or do a prompt injection to make the LLM do something it wasn't really meant to do. So in that aspect, even if you're asking it, hey, what does CNN think versus what does Fox News think, you're going to get a different perspective from each one, because each one has its own biases. And so same thing with data that we're utilizing, depending on if it's a company that has a certain stance, or maybe it's the fact that something so small as in the English language, we tend to look at computers and cars as women. We refer to them as like, she or something along those lines. Yet in other cultures, those same aspects, their cars are more masculine named. And so those are all biases. So as long as we have an idea of, and maybe that's something on the professional side we should look into more to understand, well, what does that look like and how do we relate to that? Maybe we can get into a better sense of like how the data is adopted, or how we can flag certain data to ensure that we're ensuring more professional side of those aspects, those ethical aspects.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is a point to be made that some of these societal bias, which is what we are seeing in all these models, it's nothing the model inherently invented, but
Right.
There is a case to be made that it's being exacerbated by these models, because the biases tend to be the same, but the diverse opinions are more diverse. So the most probable outputs of some of these models are the most stereotypical. For instance, like the example I gave, like my name is Ana. Ana is that particular name is always associated with women, mother,
Right.
certain professions as well, as you were saying. And again, this comes back to organizational policies around biases. Like, as an organization, like, what do you consider as acceptable in the outputs or in the communications or customer products that you are creating? And which is why, like, having these governance structures, policies, and guidelines are as important as developing innovative models.
Yeah, it is. It's massively important. I think it's going to be something that's going to be talked about a lot more here in the near future. Is not only do we have the conversations still of like the New York Times, or still of different models and different foundational groups like OpenAI purchasing, Reddit data, and now we're looking at like Stack Overflow. So more and more known good data sets are being purchased or gobbled up by these models, so that these foundational models become these world models. And the compute is kind of where they're going, and it's very interesting to see where that goes. But we're going to be having many more conversations in regards to this same topic.
Yeah, definitely. And in this particular case, so the Dana-Farber team is utilizing the Microsoft Azure's services to put validations around their inputs and outputs. But I think like there would be in the future more enterprises doing their own red teaming exercises, putting their own validations on inputs and outputs, in addition to what's already coming or in place for alignment with these models. So that's wrapping up the case study. I think we can discuss some of the lessons learned and the future directions other companies can take, given there is possibilities of the secure private deployment of commercial models. I think one of the most significant lessons for me was the importance of a community-driven participatory approach. I think by involving a broad range of stakeholders from the outset, and this included cancer patients as well as cancer survivors, Dana-Farber was able to address concerns and build a framework for AI integration that was in line with their business model and organizational goals. And moving forward, they are aiming to explore some of the advanced applications. But I think what they are doing right now is really exploring the use cases in a secure, auditable way, while also simultaneously upskilling their workforce to be ready for this new future.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are driving those policies forward, but they have to kind of make their own policies because there is no standard. Here's your policy. Microsoft has their methods and their ethical guidelines that they have that's available, and a lot of the reason why people go to Microsoft and their platform is because there is some legality help as well. If there was something to happen, as long as you're within the guidelines, they have your back, so to say. But overall, so companies definitely have to create their own policies internally. There is no standard yet, although we have different acts from like the EU. We have the Biden Administration Act. We have one that was just released from Colorado, one of the states. California has one as well that they're building out. And so it's kind of still very early stages. We're talking about massive innovation here to the point where it's, right now there's a lot of talk, not even around LLMs. It's like, where do LLMs go? Do they move to where, and what does that look like? Do they take a co-pilot approach? I believe Microsoft just released in their Build conference this last, few days, they were stating that they're now really, really pushing towards agents that are utilizing LLMs to actually drive like that effort forward. And there's a ton of information that we could talk about. Some other, some other podcasts and some other talk we can have that goes very deep into that. That'd be very interesting. But overall, talking about the aspects of this use case and really bringing the people together and the stakeholders and driving down to the level of understanding the SMEs, like those subject matter experts and those domain users or domain experts, getting them involved, because that gives you the insights into the organization. It gives you the insights to the processes that they're doing. And that's massive value, because if you understand the process and you understand where the data and you understand the upstream and the downstream of that process, like where does it go? Where did it come from? You can do a lot. I do this a lot with automation, and I do this now a lot with Gen AI. And so the same aspects are being utilized, but some of the big questions also that we can kind of look at from this use case and kind of taking a step back from Gen AI, because Gen AI has cost and it has unknown cost and it has potentially a whole lot of cost. As you enable 12,000 people to start using LLMs and start having conversations with them, that $2 per prompt relatively could turn into a bill at the end of the month of $60,000 or more dollars. And then if you start utilizing, say you bring in, depending on the licenses that you have from Microsoft, there's like E3 and E5 licenses, and they have different costs depending on what you have going on. Those same aspects, there's cost there. And then if you bring in a co-pilot, there's another cost. And then at the end of that time, are you spending $2 million a year just to drive this forward? Is it worth it? What's the use cases? A lot of the use cases that were mentioned in this use case that we were looking at were very much kind of what we've heard. They were very, let's do some knowledge building. Let's understand internally what our data is doing. Yes, we can ask questions to our data and our documents and some of those aspects, but is there value? There's time savings there, but like, where's the real value? Like, where's the dollars and cents? Is that going to, if we're all having this much trouble getting it internalized and utilizing it, how do we do that with our customers? Because we don't want some of these things we've heard in the news months and months ago of where a auto dealership brings a ChatGPT opportunity for its users to buy cars, and then everybody's buying Tahoes and Chevys for $1, because they prompt inject it, and all these other aspects of utilizing these LLMs in a bad or bad actor kind of way.
Yeah, definitely. I think you covered so many important points there. But going back to organizations having to have their own principles and policies is going to be pivotal, and we can't be really relying on big tech like Microsoft or OpenAI to kind of condition us into what is deemed ethical use of LLMs or how we should
Right.
shape the business's journey forward with generative AI. Of course, there is like a lot of push to integrate these tools and services into your businesses, but also,
Mhm.
as Doug mentioned, you have to like really evaluate some of the use cases. And I think in this particular case study, how they were trying to get to those ideal use cases was through a participatory nature, or albeit it being a cost intensive one. But as I mentioned again in the beginning of the podcast, almost all knowledge workers, at least in my circle, are using ChatGPT in one way or the other. When organizations make it happen in a secure and auditable manner, there is again, can track these things, especially around risks and security, back to certain inputs, outputs, and that can reiteratively improve these models' responsible responses and how the organization itself deals with these security aspects. Because prompt injection is a big risk when it comes to any Gen
Yep.
AI applications. And so is, I think, two behaviors, which relates to how people interact with these LLMs, which one is overly relying on LLMs, like, copy
Right.
pasting the responses as is without fact checking. And the other is giving excessive agency to these LLMs to make certain decisions without having that human in the loop uh, in place. And I think going back to some of the policy guidelines that they had in place, where they reiterated that whatever response the AI gives, ultimately it's the user's responsibility to use it wisely in your role. I think those
Right.
are good guidelines to go off of for any enterprise starting out on their Gen AI journey.
Yeah. I mean, those are excellent points as well. Just the fact that it seems like we just need a lot of training. It seems like we need to train everyone because although there's 10 million people, I think, now using ChatGPT, there's 8 billion people in the world. So there's a lot of unknowns still, and a lot of people that either can't use it or can use it. And those that are using it potentially aren't using it correctly because of the fact that it sounds very trustworthy, yet it is very not. And if you tell it to be creative, it'll be very creative and it won't even use logic. So it'll pull from anything or just make stuff up. There's the issues of the different lawyers that have used this and it just made up court cases. They looked real, but they
Yeah,
were made up. And
yeah,
so should those lawyers be banned? Like, should the bar association say, I'm sorry, you're not doing this right? There's aspects of even schools, right? We hear a lot about schools and they say, how do we deal with ChatGPT? How do we deal with students that are plagiarizing? How are, if they're asked to do a book report or asked to do something and they ask for a summary of that and GPT provides that for them, is that yes, no, maybe so, good or bad? And I definitely have a stance there
mm,
where I'm kind of on the fan or on the side of, we're not always testing people whether or not they're plagiarizing or not. What we're testing people in schools is do they understand the content? Do they understand what they're being asked to portray or understand? If they get it, and you can test them on did they understand it? Were they able to like reword that, present that back, and provide the context
mhm,
without any help? Like just as long as they understood it, then that's a win. If it took them to use an LLM to summarize something to get it to talk to them in a different way, that's still not a bad way. Same thing, and years from now, we'll look back and we'll say it's kind of like using calculators.
yeah,
Don't use it for everything, but it may help you to figure out those really hard, questions or those really hard aspects. But do you understand how to get there? Do you understand how to do PIMDOS? Do you understand order of operations? Like, yes, great, you get the concept. So now you're on the right track. Now, do you just like cheat and plagiarize every time? No, because if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So ideally, still make sure you build in the characteristics in these students, the characteristics and the things that you want to see out of them. Teach. I do this with my own children. Is I teach them how to search the internet for what they want or what they need to get the answer. But make sure, just like with LLMs, make sure they're grounded in regards to knowing what is right or wrong, because we've all been used to this as humans, and those of us that have been using technology in the many aspects that we're talking about, because we know the internet is not always right. We know Wikipedia is not right. We know that most of what we ingest is probably not right. It lies a lot like that weird uncle we all have. But in general, we should be validating that. And how do we validate that? Yeah, maybe you watch a YouTube show of somebody that's an expert or something, or maybe you go out and you find somebody on LinkedIn. Maybe you go and you do some research and you find, oh wow, they're kind of right. There is some truth, but yet not everything's always true.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think teachers have been struggling a lot since ChatGPT came out. But I think there is a case to be made about changing the ways in which we evaluate kids. So it's partly on educators to come up with novel ways to test understanding in the age of ChatGPT. As you mentioned, like calculator, they were like initially when I was giving certain examinations in college, it was banned. But then for certain subjects, it was needed to get to the next level of testing our understanding. Because what we test through calculators or without calculators is more basic compared to what you can test with the aid of technological tools like this. And again, I think going back to another point you made on, actually forgot. Yes, upskilling. Yeah. So going back to another point you made on workforce upskilling, I remember when ChatGPT came out, the reaction people had to the outputs has vastly changed to where we are right now, which is May of 2024. What was acceptable then and what wowed people is not nearly the same as what's exciting to people coming out of ChatGPT or any sort of like large language models. I remember when like the first images were generated, people were like, oh, this is so cool. But now like there is like a certain friction when you see AI generated images online, because you can tell, and also that it ties back to how people's perception has changed over time, having been acquainted with some of these models. And that is kind of like indicative of how you want to develop these products for your customers as well as for your internal workforce.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, how science can give us insight into how humans react. So on your point of how we've used it in the beginning, and it was like, it's great. And then all of a sudden there's just like this massive friction, right? So in science, there's something called Lenz's law. It's Lenz law. And Lenz's law is where you basically have a magnet, and then you have a, copper circle, and then you're going to like basically push this magnet in through the circle. But as you get closer and the faster you go, there's more resistance. It like forces you not to move almost. And so, but if you go slowly, you get less resistance, but it's still massive resistance. But the funny thing is when you start to pull back away and say like, we were going to remove GPT and we're going to stop doing all the LLM stuff, kind of like what we saw a while back. We said, hey, let's take a break or take a pause. And then the opposite happens. It pulls it towards itself. And so this is the same thing we're seeing. And it's a very human yet scientific thing of, you're pushing for change and there's massive resistance. You pull away the change and they go, wait, where's the change? Bring it back. And so there, over time, there's going to be a lot of push and pull. This is what we call like the pendulum swing side of things, where it goes one way a little bit, and then it goes, that didn't quite work, or that's a little too lenient with like AI technology. Let's go back the other way, where we start looking at the security side, which I think we're starting to see now with a lot of massive push on the security side of things, especially with all of the cyber threat and all of the bad actor stuff that is going on right now, or even with some of these large action models, which we could also talk in another point of how those work, those LAMs and large action models, and how you can get past a lot of security if you have understanding of what those are, or your GANs, like your general adversarial networks, right? So you have LLMs and you have AI and Gen AI that is actually used to fight one another or play detective and criminal to try to find out who wins and how do you get past it. And so they did a lot of this with some of the imagery that you were talking about, where it goes around how do you make the best image possible. Well, you use a GAN to say like, well, that's not close enough. That's not close enough. Oh, now you got to the point where you can actually put Tom Cruise on your face and you're like, I'm Tom Cruise, and that's a deep fake. So that's the technology we're dealing with. And now, although there was a lot of words and a lot of new nuancy things to talk about that I just mentioned in the last like 2 minutes, but that's the world we're in right now. It is a fire hose of information, massive new everything every day. This is why people like myself post on LinkedIn, and you have even like the Insight Jam team and Solutions Review, like everybody's like trying to find as much as they can and drive that nuance and understand where the future is going of this, because everything's new and everything's re-enabled, and there's going to be so many startups that are trying to disrupt everything, although they should kind of roll that back and see how they collaborate more with everyone. But that's the world we live in. So it's interesting. So a lot of good things to come out of it, and a lot of good things to talk about, and even future episodes.
Definitely. I think security, as you mentioned, is especially pivotal when taking any sort of these shiny pilot projects to production. The importance goes from what AI can do to how can we make this experience more secure and compliant for our end users or customers. And with that being said, I think like to tie everything together, especially through the lens of this case study, having like those policies and guidelines set through a governance process within your enterprise or business is going to shape how this technology is going to work for you. Because I think, as Doug mentioned, there's like a lot of possibilities coming up. But once you have the guardrails and guidelines in place, you have like a more focused goal towards how this technology would be serving your organization's missions or your customers' well-being.
Yeah, definitely hit the goals, look at the KPIs, look at those overall OKRs that the company is looking to do. That's how you can do some really good alignment, but understand that nobody has all the answers. And even your leadership and your C-suites and those definitely may not understand, and they may not know what to ask. And so make sure everybody feels that it is a brave enough space to ask questions, and a brave enough space to say, you know what, if I'm wrong, it's okay. We can all figure it out together. I think that's really good points.
Yeah, definitely. And for the viewers, if your organization is weighing generative AI strategies, especially in regulated and risk-sensitive sectors like healthcare, let us know. We'd be happy to consult and share additional learnings from initiatives like this one through our podcast.
All right. Excellent work, Ana and Doug. Thank you again for your time and insight over this past hour. It has been a pleasure to listen to. And thank you for your attendance. If you'd like to dive deeper into the topic of AI, please join us at InsightJam.com, an always-on community for all your technology needs and research, where you can watch exclusive events, read expert advice, browse vendor showcases, and more. And make sure to subscribe to our Insight Jam YouTube channel. Both links are in the description below. Thank you again for watching. My name is Jonathan. We hope to see you next time.